Hey folks, welcome to nearing the end of the Richard Lehman book retrospective look back. We're at book number 5 now on my list, so my fifth favourite, or rather fifth recommended, highest recommended book of Richard Lehman's. And this is where I'm starting to struggle a bit because the top 5 books I think are all genuinely brilliant, certainly within the realms of splatterpunk and Richard Lehman's work. Um, and at number 5, I have chosen, and it's perhaps controversial in terms of where they all get a place, but number 5, I've chosen his 1990 book, The Stake. This was the first of 3 vampire books that Richard Lehman would put out as full-length novels. And I think this is a great book on a lot of levels. This is actually the closest to a semi-autobiographical reference to Lehman as you're going to get in fiction as well. I know that in Midnight's Lair we had a character who was a writer who had a wife and a daughter trapped in a cave using the experience to write a book. Which was clearly modelled on Lehman himself. But here, the main character of Larry Dunbar is very clearly Richard Lehman. He's an author in his 40s. He has a wife and a teenage daughter, as he would have done. He was the same age as Richard Lehman would have been at that point in time. He references a novel, his second novel, that performed badly and almost tanked his career, which is referenced in The Woods Are Dark. And events that took place in this book actually happened to Richard Lehman, not the vampire stuff, but he did end up in a small town and he did discover a coffin in an abandoned building, and all that aspect of the book he actually included in here. This actually happened to Lehman in real life, so there's a lot of references here to Lehman as a man that I find it fascinating as an insight into his life itself. Now, this story concerns, like I say, an author called Larry Dunbar, who, along with his friend, end up in an abandoned town and discover a coffin. And upon opening the coffin, they discover the body of a young woman with a stake through her heart. And the question that the book poses is this a vampire or not? To answer that question, does this guy pull out the stake? I can't really figure out how that's necessarily the answer, but he does some research. He becomes a bit infatuated with this girl, and we've got a sub story involving somebody who's staking people that he believes are vampires, which is how the story starts off. And there's another sub story involving a very unsavoury teacher and the main character's daughter. These all tie together quite nicely in a story that some people think is a little padded out and a bit slow. It's quite a big book. It's about 500 pages long, so it's a long one for Lehman, but which has a very nice beginning and I think quite a good tense ending. Some good characterisation. The main villain of the piece here is particularly bad. One of, not quite like the Simon Quirt level of just insane madness that was in Endless Night, but in terms of their insidious plan and in terms of how they worm their way into the family, I thought it was very tense and very good. A very unpleasant character. And the vampire stuff here is kind of more in the background. It's not a vampire novel in the sense that the main villains are all vampires in that sense. I don't really want to spoil too much about it in case you've not read it, but the vampire element, and there are more than one vampire in this book, is in the background, but quite well handled. But it's a vampire book with a twist, in that sense. But I just think this is a very readable, very well crafted book. I've heard say elsewhere that this is arguably the most accessible novel that Lehman wrote in terms of it's one of his easiest books to read, and if you want to read something that gives you all of what you'd expect from Richard Lehman, doesn't go full force, it's a bit tamer than some of his other books, but it's definitely a very accessible novel. If you like this, you'll like a lot of Lehman's other stuff. If you don't like this, you probably won't like a lot of Lehman's stuff, but I think this is an easier book to get into than some of his other books. It's a little bit more, I use the word again, accessible. but it's also a really riveting read, and it's hard to really say an awful lot about this without spoiling the story. So I'm going to keep this review a bit shorter than usual, owing to the fact that I don't want people who haven't read it to have the story spoilt for them. But it's a cracking read, it really is. It's a tense, atmospheric, very well written tale. It's dramatic, it's dark, it's got some good action in it. It is a slower paced story than a lot of the other ones, especially the other four on this list. But I think that the way in which it's structured was just fascinating and really interesting and well written. And I would personally put this. I mean, if this is somebody's first Layman book, it's a good Layman book to start off with. But I think this is my fifth favourite Layman book in total. A book that I originally put off reading because I wasn't really interested in vampires when I was younger. So I kind of put off reading it for a while, and I'm a bit annoyed that I did because it is a vampire book, but it's also not, and it's a very good one. And yeah, obviously it's at number 5 for a reason. So this is my fifth highest recommendation for Layman. A great book. If you're not into vampires, you'll still enjoy this. You know, you don't need to like vampires to like this book. So, The Stake, a really great read, and thanks a lot for checking this out. Yeah, terrible, I know, but the book's not.